Hello, my name is JT Benitez. I'm the Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources for The Ohio State University Extension in Butler County. Today I'm going to talk to you about herbs for the garden for the Ohio Farm Science Review 2020 virtual program. I'm going to shut down my video real quick so you guys can see my screen well. So what are herbs? Herbs are non-woody annual, biennial, or perennial that die back each year after blooming and setting seed. Herbs are plants used whole or in part for flavoring of food, fragrance, health, ornament, and many other uses. The purpose of herbs, there's several uses for herbs. Flavoring food is one of the most popular uses for herbs. Food would just not be as good without herbs or even spices to flavor our food. Have you ever had food without some flavoring added? It's usually bland, and you may not be interested in eating it again, typically, because there's no flavor to it. So herbs and spices really make a difference for us in improving our food and our quality and wanting us to eat some more of it, which we all want to eat more and more when it tastes good. So herbs help with that. Without herbs, you don't have that good flavor in that food that you really want to eat more of. So herbs really do help with flavoring our food for much better experience. Fragrance and scents. Lavender is a great example of an herb that has a great fragrance to it. It's great for houses and offices and bathrooms or other rooms of the house. Mint could also be another good fragrance. Basil, when you fresh cut basil or oregano or even if it's dried, it still creates a great smell in the room. So herbs have a great fragrance to them that can extend into the room and create quite a nice smell throughout. And lavender and all those really potent ones really make a difference with fragrance. You could also use them to dye things. Some herbs have coloring when smashed that can create vibrant natural dye for clothing, painting, and other dyeing projects. They also have healing and medicinal properties as well. Some say that herbs have the healing capabilities and other medical purposes that can help you. But I would just leave that up to a health professional to decide how good those are for you. And there's some other uses out there as well. So the difference between herbs and spices. Spices grow in tropical climates. We usually consume the roots, bark, fruits, berries, or seeds for a spice. They're used for flavoring our food. Some common spices you may hear is Cajun, chili powder, cumin, curry, ginger, or black pepper. Herbs, which we're talking about today, are annuals or perennials that can live outside tropical climates. We consume the leaves, stems, flowers, seeds, or seed heads. They flavor our food, or they can be a fragrance for us, such as lavender, for example. So some common herbs that you may hear today, and there's a lot more we're going to talk about: basil, oregano, cilantro, parsley, dill, sage are just some common ones. We'll talk about a whole lot more though. So type of herbs. You have annual herbs, which means that the plant will only survive the warm time of the year in Ohio. The first frost usually kills them off at the end of the summer or early fall. And here generally it's in mid-fall. Depending where you're at, if you're out in South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, they've already had their frost. So those herbs are probably gone. But here, we generally start getting frost in October or so, sometimes as late as November, and I've seen occasionally in September. But generally it's October. Perennial herbs are plants that can survive the Ohio winter and will grow beginning in the spring once the weather warms up. So perennials do well here. They'll come back in our Ohio winters. Annual herbs. So there's a whole different list of herbs that are annual. This is a small list of them. On the right, you'll see a basil plant, which is an annual herb that was planted in my garden there. It was right when we planted it. There's a little bit of weeds out there I got to take care of, you can see, but that's right when we planted it. We didn't plant it from seed. We planted it from a transplant. But there's some other types of herbs out there. There's anise, which is a licorice-like flavor herb. Basil, which is very common, a spicy-like type herb, great for pesto. Cervale, which tastes like a parsley, anise type herb. Cilantro or coriander. So let me tell you about that. Cilantro is the leaves of the plant. That's what we usually put in our salsa. They kind of look like parsley a little bit, but that's what we use cilantro for. Now, coriander is the same plant, and it is considered a spice. It's one of those odd ones. We'll talk about another one later on too, that we use the seeds from the cilantro plant. And the coriander seeds have a mild lemon taste to them. So this is a dual purpose plant. It's used as a herb for the leaves and as a spice as a coriander, which is the seeds of the cilantro plant. So this is a very unique plant. I love cilantro, especially in my salsa. Dill is our next one. It's a fine fern-like leaves, fresh or dry, you can use them. And guess what? Our favorite pickle in the world that we consume, dill pickles, is made using dill herb. Fennel. It is a mild licorice flavor. We eat the seeds, leaves, stems, bulbs are all edible. Marjoram is another one. It's a mild oregano-like flavor. Rosemary has a very bold flavor, and the leaves are used to consume and flavor our food. Summer savory. It's a minty thyme flavor is another one of our common herbs that you may see. There's many more that probably can make this list, but these are some of the more common ones we'll talk about. I haven't even used or heard of some of these, so maybe some other chefs might use those, or different cooking styles may use some of these other ones. Biennial herbs, there's not that many of those. We'll just talk about the two most popular ones here. Two herbs common in this category are parsley and caraway. You'll see parsley's there on the left. It kind of looks like cilantro. And caraway herb is right there on the right. The first year, they produce some leaves, both of these plants, and the next year they grow into maturity. Parsley is semi-hardy, so it can possibly die in Ohio winters. Most likely, yes, because our winters aren't that warm. If you go further south, they may survive it. They're great in culinary dishes. Caraway is typically the flavor of rye bread. The seeds, leaves, roots are used in this situation. With parsley, we would use the leaves. So these are our biennial herbs that you mostly see. The most one you see is probably parsley, but the caraway used into the rye bread as well. So there's the biennial herbs. Perennial herbs. So we'll talk about the next one here. Bergamot is a flavor for tea and dry tea mixes. Chamomile is an apple-scented leaves, and it's grown as an annual, but we consume the leaves and they're apple-scented. I've never seen these two before, but I guess they're utilized. These are more known ones to me. Chives. You have the onion chives, which is the onion chive flavor, which I love onion and garlic, so both of these are my favorite. Garlic chives, a mild garlic flavor. French tarragon is a pepper scent flavor and smell to it. It's not very hardy, and it needs winter protection of straw or mulch to survive our Ohio winters, and they may still not survive if we get a really cold winter. Garlic. This is that other unique one I was going to tell you about. You have the soft neck and hard neck varieties. Soft neck is your most popular one at the grocery store. Hard neck is where you're going to see more specialty growers growing, but you may still see them at the grocery store. The plant is planted in fall and harvested in the next summer, and you consume the bulbs. It's a strong to mild flavor depending on the variety. Now, the interesting thing about garlic is it is a herb used as a spice. So it's very interesting. The dried version, I should say, of garlic is really considered the spice. So if you consume like pickled garlic or raw garlic, or you chop garlic up, I guess that would be more considered the herb in that situation. So it's a herb that is used as a spice. Lavender. It's a great fragrance type herb. We generally don't consume this. We usually use the oils or hanging them fresh cut for the fragrance. They're hardy, and they do well with some spring pruning. They get that early good smell of lavender in the spring for your residents wherever you're at to brighten up a room. Lemon balm They're dried lemony leaves used in teas, and they produce lots of seeds. Lots of seeds. Oregano has a bold flavor, and it needs winter protection, so you would need straw or mulch to protect it. Peppermint, the leaves and oils are used for teas, drinks, food, or fragrance, but they can be very invasive. Same with spearmint. You use them for the same thing, leaves and oils for tea, drinks, food, or fragrance, but they're very invasive and can take over your garden area. So you really want to have them in a contained area so they don't spread and take over. But they're a nice thing to have in your garden if you really enjoy some different mints. Sage can be used fresh or dry and has a very interesting taste to it. Thyme, it's a mild lemon clove flavor. And winter savory, it's a peppery, spicy flavor type herb. Popular in foods to use herbs. I love pizza with oregano and basil on it, and of course red pepper flakes if I have spices. You can use in your pasta, your soups, salads, meats, canned foods, sauces and salsa. I love cilantro, lots of cilantro and salsa. With my meats, I like to make lamb with rosemary. It's a great combination there. There's just so many things you can do with herbs to bring out the flavor of food and really, create that connection and excitement to eat that food with that great flavor. So yes, taste sweet, salty, bitter, spicy, sour, and then of course herby. We want the herbs to help make those impacts for our taste buds there. So how to grow herbs. Annual biennial herbs can be sowed directly from seed into pots, raised beds, or large gardens. You can plant as few seeds at a time in small pots or a lot of seeds in shallow rows in raised beds or gardens. Whatever you choose to do, however many herbs you want to raise. Perennial herbs can be propagated by division or cuttings, allowing you to grow new plants from old. It's best to divide every 3 to 4 years to keep those plants smaller and not taking over a garden area, or you can start them from seed as well in pots, raised beds, or large gardens. Either way, you can do that. Well-drained soil is best for growing herbs. Potting mixes in pots, raised bed soil type things, or large garden area, they do not like sitting in water or constantly being wet. So they can handle, they like to, have moisture, but they can survive pretty well with not being constantly wet or having that wet feed. They can do fairly well with limited resources with that. Fertilizer, little or none is generally needed. It just depends on your growing situation. Over time, plants in a pot or raised bed may need some soil rejuvenation or added fertilizer to keep the plants growing well. So be observant of the plant and determine its need when you need to make that change. A few herb plants can supply a family with plenty of herbs as they continuously produce throughout the season. We have had one basil plant in our yard right now. I just picked some today for today's presentation. I may show it up on the screen here, and then I had some drying for several days, probably like a month, I should say, trying to get it real dried out real well so I can have it in my jars to dry and keep for the winter time. And I probably will not use it all this winter. So you can keep it for a pretty long time, one plant. You can really make a difference there in having your supply there. So growing herbs in big or small spaces. Growing herbs is fun, good exercise, and encourages better eating habits and nutritious food. And you may want to plant an herb garden, but you may lack a good site to plant, do not have access to a lot of ground, live in apartments, condos, or other small spaces with not much access to grow things, or just be too busy with other things. Well, container herb garden is a simple, fun way to grow edible crops in just about any situation. It's growing in popularity because it's easy to get started and enables anyone to be successful at it. They're very easy to grow and anywhere you want to have. You just got to have enough sunlight. That's the biggest thing. Make sure you have enough sunlight there. Wherever you're trying to have those pots, make sure you get them that sunlight. It can be super beneficial for you to have edible herb containers of herbs near the kitchen door to flavor your favorite food. You can walk out there and get fresh anytime you want and not have to go anywhere to get it because it's growing right there back there for you in your backyard or wherever, on your porch or wherever you're keeping your herbs at. That's a picture of me growing a bunch of garlic right there. So I've got a lot of herbs in my large garden there. So benefits of herbs in containers, it works great because kids, college students, renters, novice gardeners, time saver, cost saving and downsizing, and those with physical limitations, it can all be very easy for this group of folks to handle very well because the containers are easy to deal with. It's all right there for you, and you're not having to be in that large garden like in the previous picture. It's all you can handle right there on your porch, like up on the top, easy to deal with. Other benefits, no major digging or tilling, no muddy shoes, mostly weed-free, inexpensive, better soil options, sun access, because you can move your pots to where the sun is, and less plant diseases, as long as you're keeping them away and keeping an eye on them. Containers can move in and out side if you have bad weather coming or if it's going to get really cold. Easier to protect from weather extremes, like I said. Animal pests or insect infestations, you can get them away from them. And improve growing conditions, and you can get an earlier start in the spring and an extension into the fall. That's the benefits of growing in containers. Containers for herbs in small spaces. You have the option of nursery pots such as clay pots, ceramic, concrete, outdoor plastic pots, or metal pots. You could go with recycling such as clean milk jugs or ice cream containers, bushel baskets, planter boxes, and self-watering containers. Be aware if you're doing any raised beds to avoid any treated lumber, and be aware that plastics that are not made for the outdoors may not last very long and become brittle from being out in the sun and the elements. So be aware of that degrade that may happen. If you end up with any other recycled materials, be aware that some of that, how long it's going to last and if it's safe to use. Over there on the right, you're going to see a pallet turned on its side with bottoms at it. So they've actually saved a lot of space there by turning it up on its side, and they're growing all kinds of stuff. And it looks like there's 5 rows of different things in there that they're growing, which you could do your herbs like that, especially your low profile type herbs such as oregano. It would be a great one to put in, or rosemary. They don't grow very tall, and so they would do very well. Now basil gets kind of tall, so you would want to probably put that one on the top and put it in that white pot there, as you see. It just depends, but there's all kinds of different ways you can come up with containers for small spaces. So types of soil mixes, you can see there they've used a laundry basket to put their plants in there. It's advisable to use some sort of potting mixes or soilless media in herb container garden, as they are light, disease-free, weed seed-free, and have good drainage. Some potting mixes have pre-mixed plant nutrients, but it's very important to read the information on the label about how long the pre-mixed nutrients will support the plant growth before you start applying fertilizers, if you need to. Garden soil, it should never be used by itself for container gardens. Soil holds water and nutrients very well and can drown roots growing in a container. Diseases and weed seeds can also be a problem in garden soils. And garden soil is heavy, which is an advantage if you're trying to anchor top-heavy plants and pots, but a disadvantage if you want to move that pot. You're going to need to get it on wheels, or otherwise it's going to be pretty heavy. Commercial soilless mixes, these are excellent choices for containers. They are lightweight, drain well, hold water and nutrients, and are generally free of weeds, insects, and diseases. They have a pH generally 6 to 7, which is great for growing anything, vegetable or herbs, even fruits. Some fruits anyway, and are typically comprised of ingredients such as sphagnum peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, composted bark, compost, and other small amounts of lime and fertilizer. Soilless mixes tend to be hydrophobic, which means they repel water. You want to work water into the mix with your hands until it's thoroughly wetted with this type of soil, because it will repel that water until you really get it into the ground there. That's what it's designed to do. So good mixtures for containers. Oh, I forgot one other thing. Other types of commercial mixes are advertised as topsoil, planting mix, or potting soil. They vary a great deal in composition and quality. Avoid mixes that contain sedge peat, feel heavy or gritty, have fine particles, or appear clumps. So that's your other types out there. Sharp sand. Use only coarse builder sand, not play sand. Sand increases porosity because of the large particles. It's relatively inexpensive and heavy, but it's not to be used by itself. You generally want to mix compost, silt, or organic matter or other mixes as you would to be needed into there. So it's sand. So there's some plants that like a little bit of more sandy soil. So this is maybe where it would come into play, where you can mix a little bit of that sharp sand in. Bark fines and wood mulch, these are high in carbon and low in nutrients and not recommended for container vegetables. And they'll actually pull nutrients from the soil as they decompose. Compost is dark, crumbly, earth-smelling product of organic matter decomposition. Leaves, grass clippings, wood waste, and farm animal manures are some of the common ingredients that are combined with water and piles or windrows and digested by huge populations of oxygen-loving microorganisms. It's recommended to include some compost in your containers because it will help greatly. Compost contains all the major and minor nutrients that plants need for good growth. For gardeners, this makes it an excellent substitute for sphagnum peat moss, which has very few nutrients. Composting effectively recycles the nutrients from gardens, landscapes, and farms. However, fertilizing still may be necessary because the nutrients in compost are released slowly and are usually not sufficient for an entire season if you do not have a good mix of compost or if it uses it up. So just be aware and observe. It's always watch and observe to see what you might need to do to help your soil. It might be good for several seasons. You just have to be very observant of how well that compost is and how good it's been decomposed, I should say, and how well it will work. Obtain only properly made compost that has been turned multiple times and reaches temperatures that will kill weed seeds and plant and plant and human pathogens. So you want to make sure it's totally, has spent enough time to properly cure over time. So you want it to be looking basically like soil. That's the best compost that you can have is when it is ready, it looks like soil. It's ready to use. Plants like soil with a pH of 5.5 to 7. That's generally most herbs and vegetables. There's other plants that may like a little higher or lower, but do your studying on that to know what you may need there. In order to grow herbs, you will need some good soil. So below are various types of mixes you can buy. A lot of times they will be listed at the store as potting soil, potting mix, planting soil, and other names. It's best to review what you are looking for when buying soil. So definitely read your label in order to determine what you're getting. There are some types of mixes, 100% compost. Be careful of excess moisture buildup. It's best to do a mix of soil and compost. 5 to 10% is not a bad idea for a level of compost amount mixed with good garden soil. But remember that garden soil can be heavy. So balancing that and knowing how you're going to be able to move that. Now, like I said, these are all just suggestions on what you may have a preference that you want to do. You could do 100% soilless mix, a 25% garden soil, and a 75% compost. But just remember what that impact's going to be. That compost obviously probably lasts more than one season with that much compost going on there. So just be monitoring that to see how well it does. You could do a 25% soilless, 25% garden, and a 50% compost mix. You could do a 25% garden soil and 75% soilless mix. And you could do a 50% soilless mix or a 50% compost. It's all up to what you want to do and how much impact you want to make for that growing medium there. Topsoil should only be added to very large containers and not exceed 10% of the volume if you do use topsoil. Container locations, you want them on level surfaces. Decks, balconies, driveways, sidewalks, or bare ground are ideal. You could have them above ground in hanging baskets or window boxes. The environmental need, generally you want to have these pots or containers or wherever that is, whatever those are, on the southern or western side of the house where the sun hits. On the northern side, a lot of times it's moldy and they don't get enough sun on that end because that's not how the sun moves through the sky. And if you, on the eastern side, a lot of times the sun doesn't directly hit in those areas very well. And a lot of times that's where mildew and mold actually forms, which could develop in your plants because it's not on that side that'll burn that kind of stuff off. 6 to 8 hours of sunlight for warm season crops, 3 to 5 hours of sunlight for cool season, and water is crucial, but do not overwater. Remember, herbs don't like to sit with wet feet, so be very, very careful how much water you give them. Containers can get too hot or cold due to exposure to outside air and elements, so be aware of the time of year. Right now, we're starting to get a little chilly at night, so those could affect some of those more sensitive plants that don't like the colder weather. Herbs can be grown in different containers, like I said, small pots, half-gallon containers, 1-gallon containers, 2-gallon, 3, planter boxes, raised beds, small or large gardens. Those are all different things or different options you can have for containers, from very small to very large. I really like this picture here on the right. That works great. If you were to get that at universal design level, for where you don't have to bend over, that's a great thing to put together. It's a permanent raised bed, but it's really raised up to where you can use it and not have to bend over, and it's right there at eye level. Not necessarily eye level, but whatever your height level is to be able to work with. You've got to protect it from animals going after it, and maybe the little neighborhood kid that likes to pull plants out of the garden or something. You never know. And you've got a great place to have all your stuff right there, and you can in total control to get the weeds and bugs and things away from them. I love that design right there. Here's some other samples of containers to garden your herbs in. This is a great space saver on this porch here. You see the buckets hanging there, and you see these little bags there on this area that they can have plants in. You see there, they're using 2-liter bottles. They've got a little square wooden box there, and there is the pallet again, working great to have some plants in there. Or you can plant a whole field. This is at my old house. I have the garlic grown there in the center with some chives also, elephant garlic, things like that. And that was my pollinator field there. But that, just saying, you could plant it right up there in that big soybean field out there in the distance there. You never know how many herbs you want to grow. Maybe you'll start a business or something, right? Plant herb seeds or transplants in containers at the same time in the same way you would plant vegetables in your garden. So around the same time. Use the right potting mix and plant seeds or transplants according to instructions on your seed packets, or your container packets is what your container transplant area or labels. If larger containers are used, use roller platforms to facilitate movement of the containers from one location to another in your backyard. Remember, they can get very heavy if you got that heavy garden soil in it. Plants grown in containers need frequent watering, as containers can dry out fast, but remember not to overwater. Watering on a daily basis may be necessary to provide adequate moisture for plant growth. It's just regular monitoring to make sure. Apply enough water to reach the bottom of the container and allow the excess to drain out the drainage holes. And avoid wetting the leaves when watering, as this will encourage development of foliar diseases. Try not to allow the containers to dry out completely between watering, as this could lead to some issues with wilting or plants not developing right and things like that, or not receiving enough water to develop. Do not overwater the plants, as container will be waterlogged and the roots will lack oxygen, leading to poor growth and eventually the plant's death. The roots of plants need oxygen to go through the soil and reach those roots. And if there's too much water, no oxygen is getting to that plant, and it's basically drowning in the soil from too much water. So be aware of that. Overwatering is not a good thing either, as well as not enough water. Pest and disease management, enemy number one right there on the right, the Japanese beetle. They have done some damage on some basil plants for me. I had some young, fresh basil plants for a program, and they got to them before I could get them away, and I had to go hide them in my garage because they were just tearing up and eating my basil plants. Herbs grown in containers or anywhere can be attacked by insects and pests and diseases. So inspect your plants periodically to see if there's any attack of aphids, spider mites, white flies, or like I said, that Japanese beetle. Foliar diseases and root rot can occur. Overwatering plants can lead to dampening off disease and other root rot issues. Foliar diseases from water getting on the leaves and spending it too long on there and not being able to dry off, creating a foliar type disease on the leaves. Inspect plants regularly and check them for those disease and bugs and those insects. And only use recommended insecticides, fungicides, or any other herbicides by following and reading your label. Nutrient needs. Container-grown plants require more fertilization due to limited soil access. They have less air to draw nutrients, but just monitor with you mixing your right compost and soil. You may be just fine. You don't need to do any fertilization. Remember, herbs don't need a whole lot, but you just need to monitor to make sure if you do need to check that. Fertilizer can be pre-mixed with soil mix before filling the container. So you may already have it in there, so you don't need to add anymore because it's already coming with your soil that you purchased. So follow your label for mixing requirements. Fertilizer can be applied as a nutrient solution during watering. Follow that label, or a slow release fertilizer. Once again, follow that label. You may not need it. If you buy the right soil, you probably don't need it. You may need it over time, but you may not need it in that first year, maybe even 2 to 3, depending what your nutrient uptake has been from those plants. Learn what your plant needs and soil qualities before applying any fertilizer. And that goes for any plants that you're doing, grass, vegetable plants, fruit plants, trees, whatever. Always, the best thing to do right there, if you're doing large gardens or your yards or things, soil test it before you add anything so you know what you're doing. If you already know what you're buying in your soil mixes, you don't need the soil test. It should already be on there what you're getting. But if you're doing a large garden, do a soil test. Contact your local extension office and they'll help you get set up with that. So harvesting herbs, that is my mint taking over my garden at my old house. Like I said, it will take over. It's going into those other garden plants you see there. So it can take over an area very easily. Leaves can be picked from plants as needed. Depending on the plant, some plants you can take 1/3 of the leaves, while others you could take more or less. Just depends. Read up on your herbs to determine how much to harvest. It's best to follow the rule of take no more than 1/3 of the plant to allow for good regrowth for the season. Most herbs reach peak flavor before flowering. The best stage to harvest leaves or seeds is before storage. Pick your herbs in the morning after the moisture of dew is gone and the leaves are completely dry. So that is very important. Seeds would be gathered after flowering. Would be a coriander, which is a spice. So that right there, you may have coriander develop seeds, which was the cilantro. That's when you would pick those seeds after the flowering for that. Basil, you want to pick those blossoms off. That will help improve the taste of the basil plant as well. So there may be some herbs that require you to do something about those blossoms in order to improve the taste of the plant as well. So read up on those. There's lots of different specification on harvest on each individual herb as well. So how to eat herbs? You can eat them fresh, picked right from the plant, washed and used in your dish. Basil is great for that. Oregano is great for that. You can freeze them, pick fresh, wash, dry off, and saved in an undried state in the freezer, in a freezer bag type to protect it from freezer burn. Dried, you can dry herbs, and they are 3 to 4 times stronger than fresh plants when they are dried. So that's why you see so many dried herbs in the cabinet, because they can really make an impact on your dish dried. They're 3 to 4 times stronger. But there's nothing wrong with having a good fresh herb in your dishes as well. Hung in a warm, dry, well-ventilated area away from sunlight. You can do that to dry your herbs. Sunlight will reduce the flavor of the herbs if it's in the sunlight. Dehydrators are another option. You would lay out the leaves onto a screen and follow the directions of your dehydrator. And once dehydrated, they can be stored and enjoyed as well. But remember, follow your instructions and be sure they're dried to the level that's safe to use. Microwaves or ovens are not the best, are not good at all, really, because they can over-dry your herbs and reduce your flavor. So they dry them too fast. So hanging or dehydrator could help dry them a lot more efficiently at a slower pace and preserve that flavor a lot better than doing a microwave or an oven. And there's somebody hanging some herbs and looks like a barn in a quiet place there out of the sun. Well, I don't know about that window. They probably shouldn't have it by that window. There's some sun hitting it there. But otherwise, a cool, dry clean place to hang your herbs. So I've got some sample herbs. I'm going to turn my screen on here real quick. If I can find it. There we go. All right. So I picked some herbs for today's presentation. I've got some fresh basil here. Look up on the right part of the screen there and you'll be able to see me. I picked some today. I actually have some blooms on there. There we go. I should be picking those off in order for the basil to have much better flavor. I also picked some rosemary right here. And it's a little woody type plant here. Let me do this real quick. I'm going to stop share real quick. There we go. That way you can see a little better. There we go. So there's my rosemary right there, and you can see how this is designed here. This is the flavoring part. We'd use the leaves here. You would dry this, and it actually would dry in that state there. Whoop, my oregano is attached to the rosemary. Here's my oregano freshly picked today. Oh, it smells very good. There are these little leaves right here. Okay. Great, great things to have in your different dishes. And I showed you my basil, but let me show it again. There's the blossoms there. And this is freshly picked. So it's starting to wilt a little bit because I picked this afternoon. But I could get this hanging and drying out real well. Let me show you some dry. I've actually had them drying for about a month or so. So here's the oregano in its dried form. I was using a zip tie to hold it together and hang it in my garage. I used just a coat hanger. I kept a fan running so that way there was good airflow and it kept the humidity and the heat down in there and kept air running to it so it dried out real nicely. And you can see here, it'll just crumble on my computer. So it's almost just like it's ready to go into the container and use throughout the season. And my last thing I had here drying, this one's been dried for a little while now, probably 2 months. And you can see I've got this, and watch how it crumbles. It just kind of crumbles. Well, I can't quite get it there. It crumbles right up into what you would find in a container. It's all over my computer now. But this is after drying in my garage as well. I just took a zip tie, hung it on a coat hanger, and hung it in the garage and let it dry. Now, we have dehydrated them before, but I decided to try out the hanging method to see how well it would work. But let me go ahead and reshare my presentation real quick, and we'll get this finished. Okay, so I showed you some different herbs that I had growing just here at my house. I used to grow a lot more. We're waiting to move in our new house, and I'll have a whole lot more to show you all in the future. So let's talk about basil real quick. I just showed you the plant. It's an annual. It grows throughout the season and dies in the fall with the first frost. It's very sensitive to getting hit with the frost. So it will be one of the first things to go as soon as it gets hit with it. It does well in pots, containers, or gardens. I grow them out in the garden. They grow huge out in my large garden. They grow humongous. I mean, one plant could supply us for a long, long time because they just grow very large out there. They like full sun and mostly sunny areas. So make sure you've got a good area where if you have them in a container where they're getting a lot of sun throughout the day. Harvesting, you pick the leaves as needed, leave enough for regrowth. As you can see, I didn't pick a whole lot. I can get a lot out of just that little area dried. So you don't need to pick just enough what you need to dry, and as you go and let the plant regenerate, you could have a ton of basil stored up and dried for the season, or use it as you go. You can use it in tomato dishes, pesto, pizza, meat, soup, stews, or salads, and there's other things as well. Okay, oregano. There it is, growing out in the garden as well. It's a perennial. But sometimes it kind of does die off. It will try to come back next year. I haven't had much success because I was in Indiana and it was a lot colder there. But it should come back next year if you keep it in a more protected area than where I had it at. It does well in pots, containers, or gardens. It's full sun to mostly sunny. Harvesting, you pick the leaves as needed and leave enough for the regrowth. Soup, stews, salads, pasta, and pizza. Pizza. It's great on pizza. You always see it at like the different pizza chains out there. Always seem to have it somewhere close by where you can add it to your pizza. So try it out. You'll really enjoy having oregano on your pizza. Rosemary. Rosemary is an annual, tender perennial. So it is kind of a perennial, but for our area, it's basically an annual. It will not survive the winter very well, if at all here. It grows throughout the season and generally dies in the fall with the first frost in Ohio. Does well in other areas that are not as cold. Does well in pots, containers, or gardens, full sun or mostly sunny. Its tips and foliage can be cut as needed throughout the growing season. So you can see that there. Used sparingly as an accent to food, as the flavor can be somewhat pungent, very strong flavor, very good smelling flavor too. Usually it can be a great fragrance as well. Fish, pork, lamb, which is very popular with rosemary. Poultry or wild game. Next is dill. It's an annual. It grows throughout the season and dies in the fall with the first frost. It does well in pots, containers, or gardens in its full sun and mostly sunny areas. Harvesting, you pick the leaves as the flowers open, or you can pick the seeds when flat and brown. So there's two uses of this plant. This is the plant that you're going to pickle your pickles, your cucumbers with. You're going to use this spice here, or I should say this herb, this herb to season your pickles. And that's why they call it dill pickles, because it's seasoned with dill. So like I said, canned pickles, cheese, eggs, soups, sauces, and vegetables. I think I've had dill cheese before, dill on cheese. I think it's pretty good. I'm pretty sure I've had that before. Mint, this was in my garden. Like I said, it was growing very, very well. It's a perennial. It definitely does well in the winter. It has no issues. It comes back every year, and it's that strong. It grows throughout the season. Does well in pots, containers, or gardens, but like I said, if you've got it in a flower garden or your garden, it will take over. Full sun to mostly sunny. You use the leaves anytime. You probably won't make a dent in them as fast as they grow. Uses peppermint, fruit cocktails, or ice cream. And spearmint, iced tea, lamb, or jelly is common to use those types of mints. Sage, they make a great pollinator plant. We had so many bees and wasps and bumblebees and flies, whatever, on there, pollinating those flowers right there, the sage plant. If anything, they're just a great plant to have as a flower plant as well. But they're perennial. They grow throughout the season. Will come back next year. And they do. They're very strong. They get very big. They do very well. They come back just as strong as the year before. I've really enjoyed growing sage. I actually grew them in a raised bed. They were outgrowing the raised bed, so I needed to actually split them. I didn't get to do that. I moved from that house, so the new owners got the large bed of sage plant because we have so many. We had a few in there that actually grew together. There was a lot. Full sun to mostly sunny. Use the leaves anytime. Fish, pork, and poultry dishes, vegetables, and sausages. Sage and the sausage, right? I love sausage, and generally it has that herb in there that really makes it a very good flavoring sausage. Garlic chives. We had these in our raised bed as well, and they did very well. They used to spread very well and encompass a lot of the raised bed. They go throughout the season, come back next year. They do well in pots, containers, or gardens, full of mostly sunny areas. Use the leaves, which is those little shoots right there. Those are the flower and seed heads there. But you use the little green shoots. A lot of times you'll have them on your baked potato. They're great on a baked potato. Use the leaves anytime. Flowers can be as an edible garnish. So those little flowers that bloom on there can be an edible garnish. Never did eat those, so I never have tried those. Salads, dips, soups, stews, vinegars, cheese dishes, sour cream, and butter. Putting them on your baked potato. Oh, yes. All right, and that is it for us today. Thank you. Oh, the last thing, you're going to need all these tools to plant your herbs. You need a pot or an area to plant in, a shovel. You need your plant. You need water, soil, maybe a rake, sun, and that time. Okay, and thank you today. I'm glad to be sharing this with you for the Ohio Farm Science Review 2020 virtual series, or virtual program, I should say. And if you have any questions, please let me know. You can find me at Ohio State Extension in Butler County. Look me up there if you have any further questions, and I'll follow up with whatever you all need as well. Thank you. And I'll go ahead and wave to you all real quick. Bye. Thank you very much. Have a good day.